United.
Good morning, dzień dobry. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the main session, Digital Cooperation in Practice, IGF Dynamic Coalitions. In this session, we'll be showcasing the IGF Dynamic Coalitions as examples of multi-stakeholder digital cooperation mechanisms. Our session will be split into two halves. First, we will hear from the DCs themselves about how this work relates to the IGF issue areas, and also how their work contributes to advancing the debate on specific topics included within these areas. In our second part, we will have a strategic discussion on how the DCs could contribute to a broader digital cooperation effort and also to a strengthened IGF. We'll also be hearing from distinguished guests from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, also from the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, and of course, the chair of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. A total of 17 DCs have been or will be presenting their work here at the IGF. So when you hear from the Dynamic Coalitions, please do know that they will be talking more in depth about the very important work they do in the specific issue areas they are concentrated on. We're going to actually talk in about 40 minutes in our section 1. It's really important to know that the Dynamic Coalitions, their work is very important in the broader context, both in the IGF and also in the challenges of internet governance and the broader challenges our world faces. There are things that really concern us. The global health crisis is still going on. Climate change is definitely a hot topic, both at the IGF here and elsewhere in other fora. We're talking about security and safety and human rights. There's many dynamic transformations that our society is going through right now, and the need for multi-sectoral digital cooperation is greater than ever right now. How do these DCs contribute to addressing these global digital challenges? We're going to start with one of the familiar issues, global health crisis and social inequalities. We're joined with our co-moderator, Tatiana Tropina, online in our Zoom room. We're actually going to fully utilize our hybrid formats. Many of the Dynamic Coalitions who will be presenting and talking about their work will also be joining us in the Zoom room as well. So Tatiana, I will hand the mic over to you for our first issue area.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and welcome everybody who is online or on site. Unfortunately, I cannot see you in the room, but I'm pretty sure that we are going to all enjoy this session. And just a bit of a moderatorial issue here to all the Dynamic Coalitions who are going to present, whether you're presenting online or on site. I really would like you, in the spirit of time, to keep your interventions short. I would say 3 minutes, please do not go more than 4 minutes. And as Jennifer said, we are going to start with a big issue area where most of the Dynamic Coalitions are working, but bearing in mind that most of them are actually working on cross-cutting issues and sometimes cooperating and collaborating. To the Dynamic Coalitions, we read all your papers and we know that you do a fascinating work. And I'm first going to start with a question to Dynamic Coalition on Gender. And we have the first speaker representing this Dynamic Coalition, Debarati, and I want to ask you, how can we address these links between digital inequality and social and economic inequality in the times of global health crisis, in the context of COVID pandemic, and in the context of gender, to make really gender equal, gender responsive, gender sensitive digital policies, gender sensitive and gender responsive internet governance? And Debarati, the floor is yours. And for some reason, I do not see the variety in the Zoom room. Is there anybody from the Dynamic Coalition on Gender who wants to take this question? And if not, perhaps we better shift it to some later time. Dynamic Coalition on Gender, if you come online at some point, please do let me know. And then I'm going to move to Dynamic Coalition on Public Access in Libraries. And from your submission, we saw that your Dynamic Coalition works on the cross-cutting area of bridging these social inequalities, and again, especially in the context of global health crisis, by working on what you call meaningful access. So from your perspective, how your work, how your Dynamic Coalition can contribute to solving these inequalities, to bridging this gap in meaningful access. And again, I cannot see the room, unfortunately, and all I can see is only the Zoom room. So is there anybody from Dynamic Coalition on public access in libraries who can take this question?
Absolutely. Good morning, Tatiana. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here. Also very pleased to open the discussion. My name is Valencia Drzvenikova, representing the Dynamic Coalition on Public Access in Libraries. Indeed, the key area for us would be meaningful universal connectivity, and our area of expertise is, as you guessed it from the name, internet and ICT access in shared and public community facilities like libraries. So as a starting point, I guess what I could say is a few trends that has guided our recent work that we've observed over the past few months is, of course, the flexibility and innovation in public access provision that we've been seeing. So libraries and similar venues doing anything from access to computers connected to the internet by appointment, or Wi-Fi outside of the building, or creating access points in outdoor public places, hotspots and dongle loans, and other measures that target specifically this issue that there are people who are unfortunately left behind when personal access is not available for one reason or another. And another dimension, speaking to the concept of meaningful inclusion, is the way public access computers and internet have been leveraged to meet community needs and support rebuilding, for example, to support digital skills training, or to power access to e-learning and upskilling for job seekers, and so on and so on. So seeing this versatility of this tool at everyone's disposal, basically, what RDC has been focusing on recently is gathering evidence, recommendations, and good practices for maximizing this impact of public access. We've recently released a consolidated report on the role that public access plays in broadband policies, so both what policy mechanisms are available to enable this, and examples and lessons learned from rolling out these policy measures in practice on the ground, essentially. And a few days ago, we've actually released a working draft on the impacts of public access. It looks at studies and reports from sort of different regional country contexts, at the way that public access basically makes a difference, and what evaluation measures are there to support further data gathering. It's been very interesting for us, of course, to also take stock of this recent evidence. For example, to see what user groups tend to rely more on public access, why use public access when alternatives are there. For example, in some areas, there's been interesting evidence suggesting that there's substantial demand for on-the-spot support from the staff, with digital queries, anything from how to find a specific website to how to use a particular e-government service, and so on and so on. I'll stop there to try to keep this short, but we're of course delighted to be here and to have this chance to connect and take stock and to look ahead.
Thank you very much, Valencia. Especially thank you for keeping it short. And I must say that in all these years, I'm keeping up with the work of Dynamic Coalition, and moderating this session is great to see how the Dynamic Coalition of Public Access in Libraries is advancing its work. And we are moving to the next issue, network neutrality. And I saw that Chris Marsden is already in the room, very much willing to speak. And Chris, I have a question to you. You mentioned in your Dynamic Coalition paper, you work on the report about the value of internet openness in times of crisis. So from the perspective of your Dynamic Coalition, what can you do, or what can we all do to secure this value of the open internet in times of crisis? And Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My version of Zoom, good, I do exist, you can actually see me. It would be terribly rude to just have the voice and not the speech. I should say I've actually added to it by actually including in the chat our mini report back. So thank you, Tatiana. I will apologize to everybody. I'm actually teaching 5 past the hour. So I asked to be called early and I won't be able to join for the second half of the session. But with 16 other dynamic coalitions, I'm sure that you'll have plenty to talk about for the session. So yes, a couple of things. We focus very much on interoperability in the Dynamic Coalition. And of course, this is a report back because the Dynamic Coalition was yesterday afternoon. We were the last session yesterday afternoon, mainly online. And I'm delighted to say that everybody appeared to be able to contribute despite the net neutrality problems we might have in certain places. Interoperability, there's 3 points to make really from the Dynamic Coalition. First is neutrality, it turns out, is very much an issue that involves interoperability as a requirement. Because of the need, of course, not just for the internet, but for the platforms that operate on the internet to be able to interoperate. And this is a great problem, not just because telcos don't always make it easy to interoperate between different systems, particularly what they still insist on calling over-the-top services, which is their insulting way of saying we can regulate WhatsApp and Skype, even though they're not quite us, because they compete with us, which of course is one of the original net neutrality problems, but also because of the difficulties in terms of being able to communicate between those messaging services. And as you can imagine, companies like Facebook are not ecstatic about the idea that they may be forced to interoperate with other companies such as Telegram or Signal. Which might be more, well, in one case, more privacy preserving, in the other case, maybe more privacy invasive. So interoperability is extremely important, and there's a great deal of work that regulators and stakeholders need to do. We had a conversation with several regulators and also with several other stakeholders that I think was very useful, but also with computer science experts as well. And we produced a statement on net neutrality and interoperability. The status, I think, is that it's being published today. But we agreed the statement yesterday in the session, so that will be available. And there should be a clean version. You can see actually on my notes I've included, is there a clean version to share, which is a question to Luca, so we'll find out if that's the case. Second point is that heroic regulators, and we had 2 heroes in the room with us yesterday from France and Norway, are doing a lot of work to actually enforce net neutrality. Now, I think everyone in this room knows that about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, every country passed a law that said, yes, it's about the open internet. And as I can tell from Tatiana's face, she's saying, well, open internet can mean absolutely anything. So has it been enforced? And the short answer is no. In very few countries has there been any enforcement at all. I had the great joy over the years of visiting lots of countries where there was a complete refusal to enforce net neutrality, from Mexico to Brazil to my own country, the United Kingdom, which used to be in Europe, which is now in the middle of the Atlantic. So yeah, major problems with that. Even transparency has been an issue. And then the third and final point I'll make is that we have, in the past, we saw problems about content providers being able to access users on request. So by this, I mean Netflix and YouTube and so on. Of course, last night there was a major problem, but that was caused by Amazon Web Services going down overnight. So if any of you was in a hotel in Poland trying to Netflix and chill and discovering you couldn't, that wasn't a net neutrality violation last night. So well, almost certainly it wasn't. But we have an issue. And we had an expert from Korea who was fantastically helpful, talking about the battles there over paid peering, which is basically a way of shaking down the GAFAM and Netflix companies to get more money out of them, which is the emerging battle coming in net neutrality. So 7 or 8 years ago, this was the 9th meeting of the Dynamic Coalition on Net Neutrality, because we started in 2013 back in Bali, for those who remember our time there together. So in this, our 9th meeting, we're no longer talking so much about the blocking of Skype and WhatsApp and those problems that emerged in 2013, but about the problems of essentially the shaking down of these paid content providers. So that going forward is going to be the issue. In 2013, the blocking of Skype and WhatsApp is what we called net neutrality light, which is basically saying to the telcos, don't do anything obviously evil, like blocking Skype or WhatsApp or Zoom. Hopefully they're not doing that for people contributing today. But today it's now becoming much more about the shaking down of the content providers. Essentially, it's open season on the GAFAM platforms, isn't it? Everyone knows that they've been under-regulated and the telcos want to take their piece of that pie, which we might think is more appropriately dealt with through taxation or competition policy. The telcos think that they can shake them down. So that's going to be a huge issue going forward. And that completes the voting of the Rio de Janeiro jury, but me representing Luca, hopefully usefully. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, and good luck with teaching later. What really struck me when I was reading the papers, because I did read them in the with digital cooperation in mind, and I saw that there were two dynamic coalitions actually cooperated, and I don't know if we have the dynamic coalition on community connectivity in the Zoom room, because I do not see Jane Coffin in the Zoom room, but perhaps on site. And I have a question to Dynamic Coalition on community connectivity, because I saw that this Dynamic Coalition joint effort with Dynamic Coalition on net neutrality to work on the report about the value of internet openness in times of crisis, which I mentioned before. So I wanted to ask, what can be done for the open internet in time of crisis from the perspective of community connectivity? And Jane, if you are in the room, the floor is yours.
If she's not, this may also be a Luca production. So just so that everyone knows, there's been very close relationships between the Net Neutrality Dynamic Coalition, the Platform Responsibility Dynamic Coalition, there's obviously a relationship there on regulation, and the Community Connectivity Dynamic Coalition as well. So those three things have worked together very well. I will say that I know a little, but only enough to be dangerous, Tatiana, so I won't answer that question, but maybe Jane will chip in a little bit later.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I would like to hand it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, if there is no Jane in the room, because I do not see her online in the Zoom, maybe perhaps we can move now to the second issue area and come back to a few questions later if we will have more speakers joining.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana. I do not believe I see Jane in the room, but I'm sure there will be more time later for other dynamic coalitions or representatives from other dynamic coalitions to definitely add to the very good points that we've been hearing so far. So now, without further ado, we're moving to issue area 2, environmental sustainability and climate change. Now, this is one of the topics that have been extremely discussed and hot, both in the previous digital edition of the IGF last year, as well as this year. There has been many sessions and also main session dedicated to this topic. I would like to turn to Internet Rights and Principles Coalition, so IRPC. And do we have Santosh Sigda in the Zoom room, Tatiana? Just so we know. Okay, thank you. I see a nod already. This is great. So Santosh, when we were looking at the issue papers that were submitted, we know that your dynamic coalition is dealing with a whole spectrum of problems related to human rights in the digital context. And one of the areas of your work is related to environmental sustainability. We saw that in your submission that the DC devoted efforts to this year to the issue of greening internet governance. This is a term that I'm not particularly familiar with, and I would like to hear a lot more. How does your dynamic coalition contribute to these efforts? Santosh, the floor is yours. Do we have Santosh in the Zoom room?
We actually do. So I wonder if Santosh can speak, and if not, we do have Minda Moreira in the room. Minda, maybe you can take over if Santosh has connectivity problems.
Okay, hello. I'm not sure if my camera is on. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so it's a little bit short notice for me, but I would like to talk a little bit about what we have been doing and on environmental sustainability. We have the Charter as our main guide, so our outreach work. It's been drawing on this charter, the Charter of Human Rights and Principles for the Internet, that we published 10 years ago. And one of the articles, Article 4, the right to development, has a clause there that is environmental sustainability. And a few years ago, looking at several issues, we also realized that this was one issue that was very timely and was not on the main agendas of the IGF. So we started bringing it slowly to the IGF. In 2018, we had our first meeting on sustainability, environmental sustainability, and technology. And then later in Eurodig, we came back to the issue on a flash session, so the European Internet governance. And in 2019, we went back to the room with a big breakout session on climate change and the Internet, so Internet futures and climate change. And since then, we have been working with other partners at Eurodig, for instance, where we put together two big sessions, one in 2020 and one this year on environmental sustainability. Last year, we tried to connect the issue of environmental sustainability, Internet technologies, and human rights. And we come back to the table this year again tomorrow, this afternoon, with another session on artificial intelligence, environment, and human rights. So we think that is really important to highlight this issue. Is an issue that younger generations mostly are very passionate about, and we worked together with this youth on this as well. And we are really happy that at the moment the IGF has been highlighting this and has now in the main agendas. And we have a lot happening, not only at the IGF, but throughout, and a lot of work that came from within the IGF community and now is happening elsewhere. For instance, codes with the UNEP, but many other examples. And greening internet governance, just to finish this, is the intersessional work that we have been developing at the Eurodig. So after all the two sessions that we had last year and this year, we had decided to start an intersessional group that is called Greening Internet Governance, and obviously it has all to do with bringing this issue to the agenda and seeing how you can, within the internet governance community, make sure that we have technologies that are not only rights-based, but also environmentally sustainable.
Thank you, Mindy. I think this was really enlightening for many of us, and it's very encouraging to hear that you've been doing very good cooperative work with Eurodig, who is one of the regional IGFs. So the collaboration between the Dynamic Coalitions and also the national and regional initiatives, very important intersessional work of the IGF. And also very important here at the IGF, I mean, environment and also sustainability is part of the areas that the Policy Network on Environment will be talking about and looking into. So they also have their sessions, I believe, later today and also tomorrow. Is there anybody else in the Zoom room who would like to take the floor, Tatiana, on this particular issue area?
I don't see any hands raised just yet, but please, if you're in the Zoom room and you would like to add something to what has been said, please raise your hand and I will call your name. Amir, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we absolutely can hear you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to mention to a vital issue here, and I would like to suggest in regard to this. I think that before going forward and before discussing about digital cooperation, we should first define the nature and characteristics of good internet. What is good internet? And what is good digital space? What kind of internet and cyberspace we are going to shape together? A good internet, we want to shape a good internet as a civilian-only and development-oriented environment, or we want to shape a militarized or unstable internet, and we want to shape an internet as a new battlefield for cyber warfare at global level. I would like to suggest that the issue of the definition of nature and characteristics of internet should be at the agenda of global digital cooperation. Before digital cooperation, we should define collectively the definition of internet. How could we want to put digital economy and trade and relation and communication between nations on such an unstable and weaponized environment? Don't you think that a global declaration by all member states to recognize internet as a civilian space only for peaceful purposes and global public goods could help to achieving this goal? What would be the role of United Nations family in this regard? What would be the contribution of IGF Plus community in this regard? I hope this comment and my statement will be reflected in IGF message. And I would like to request to put this important issue, this vital issue, I mean, definition of the nature and characteristics of internet should be added to the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amir. And indeed, this is the food for thought for the work of Dynamic Coalition and perhaps something to reflect in the second part of this session. Now, I would like to hand it back over to you, Jennifer, to continue with the questions to Dynamic Coalition. I do believe that for the next one, Yasmin would represent the DC on platform responsibility. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Tatiana. We are fully utilizing the hybrid format here. So now we're going to jump to the issue area 3. It is emerging regulation, market structure, content, data, and consumer rights and protection. Huge issue area here, and we have many DCs working specifically on these topic areas. I'm going to turn first to the Dynamic Coalition on Platform Responsibility. Now, I heard from Tatiana that Yasmin is in the Zoom room, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. The issue of content moderation has been at the center of the regulatory debate during the COVID pandemic. How does the work of this DC contribute to ensuring that approaches to content moderation are compliant with the human rights frameworks, are transparent and accountable, and enable a safe, united, and inclusive internet? Yasmin, the floor is yours.
Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Tatiana. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here representing the DCPR. So, past DCPR works, we have many works focusing on exploring various aspects of platform responsibilities and regulation, including by trying to bridge the gap between policymakers, academia, and private sector via the elaboration of multi-stakeholder documents such as the recommendation on terms and of service and human rights and best practices on effective remedies. This year, we are also launching at the IGF at our session tomorrow the glossary of platforms of policy and terms for platforms. So we are concentrating efforts to verbalize such documents, the study of content moderation and what practices can be considered as compatible with human rights has been a key concern of our past works also, including research outcomes such as the 2019 special issue on platform values and the 2017 annual report on platform regulations, and remain an essential topic of discussion for us. I'm sorry if I'm speaking a bit slow and confusing because it's 6 in the morning here in Brazil. So I think that's all my contributions for this question.
Thank you, Yasmin. No, not at all. This is actually the point where we want to showcase the very good work that all the dynamic coalitions are doing. And thank you for joining so early in the morning from Brazil. Also, people who are very interested in platform responsibility, do go to their session tomorrow. I think you'll be enlightened with their glossary that they will be presenting, which is very important. Now I would like to turn to the Dynamic Coalition on children's rights in the digital environment. Now I'll admit I had the pleasure of personally attending their session yesterday at the IGF, which they discussed the very good work that they do in the issue areas of children's rights. And I see that Yuta is online with us in the Zoom room as well. So Yuta, how does the work of this dynamic coalition contribute to addressing the challenge of content regulation from the perspective of ensuring children's rights? Yuta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer, for giving me the floor. For me, it's not so early in the morning here in Berlin. First of all, I would like to mention that the Dynamic Coalition just this year changed their name from previously being the Dynamic Coalition on Child Online Safety, now to the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment. And why did we do so? So the work of the Dynamic Coalition is focused on balancing human rights to privacy, freedom of speech, freedom of information, with the rights to protection. And it was over 30 years ago that the United Nations acknowledged that children need special protection of their rights. Their rights need to be emphasized. They are human rights, and they are in line with the human rights of all people in the world, but they need to be emphasized. And this was now, over 30 years later, these rights have been adapted to the digital environment with the General Comment number 25 on children's rights in the digital environment, where several members of the Dynamic Coalition have been part of the working group that, together with the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, have developed this General Comment. So now we have a global standard how to understand children's rights to protection, provision and participation in the digital environment in these days, and how to guarantee that the best interest of the child is a primary consideration in policy and in internet governance. When I say we need to balance these rights, we know that it's always been under debate whether the right to freedom of speech can override the right of children to be protected. Also, the right to privacy of all users of the internet seems to be somehow in contradiction to the right to protection. But when our member of the Dynamic Coalition, ECPAT International, did a research recently in more than 8 countries around the world, Over 70% of the respondents to that survey said they would prioritize child protection over their individual privacy if that would be necessary. So we don't think that there is a conflict. There is the option to balance these rights. And the session that we held yesterday that Jennifer already referred to dealt with the question whether it's possible to have a harmonized legal framework with the best interest of the child being a primary consideration. And that is what Article 3 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as Article 24 of the EU Charter of Human Rights, is asking for, taking the best interest of the child as a primary consideration in any decision that is taken. And that is what the Dynamic Coalition is working for, and that is also what we are looking for to achieve with the Dynamic Coalition in the framework of internet governance. That would be my contribution to the session, and I'm looking pretty much forward to hear from all the other Dynamic Coalitions, and especially where the lines are that we can cooperate. It's platform responsibility, of course, that is related to the work of the Dynamic Coalition, as well as internet rights and principles that we are in close cooperation with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jutta. Thank you for giving us the highlights of the really good work that the DC on children's rights in the digital environment has been doing. It sounds like it's not only cooperation within the DCs themselves as well, but for this Dynamic Coalition, there's a lot of work that they work with multi-sectoral and different stakeholders that all come together to ensure that children are protected online. So now I would like to hand the mic back to my co-moderator, Tatiana, and she'll be talking a little bit more about issue area 4, advancing digital cooperation. Tatiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. But before we move to digital cooperation, I just want to highlight two things. First of all, Deborah Ratti from Dynamic Coalition on Gender fixed the connectivity issue so we can re-ask the question before we move to digital cooperation. And then Jennifer, after the digital cooperation, in between the two sessions, if we have free time, we have Bangladesh Hub having a question. And with this, I would like to invite Deborah to speak, and I will just repeat the question which we had for you. So the question was, how can we address the links between digital inequality and social and economic inequality in the context of this global health crisis, and ensure that we make digital policies gender equal, gender responsive. So what your Dynamic Coalition is doing in this regard? And Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the space, and I apologize for the delay because of network issues. In our work at DC Gender, we really center the idea of gender equality and inclusion within the digital and internet rights and governance spaces. And we think it's important both in terms of policy and implementation, especially because the digital landscape has undergone significant changes during COVID. And in our work, we see that women and marginalized genders are increasingly experiencing the need to be able to be equipped with skills to navigate the space freely and safely. And we know that 54% of women actually in low and middle income countries are using mobile internet, which means the gender gap is actually narrowing. But despite this, there is still gender gap in terms of access to devices, even access to the internet, which women, trans, non-binary persons are facing a lot. And that directly connects to in access to food, healthcare, essential services, education, information, and crucial helplines, even the freedom from violence. So this is not just an affordability issue, but because of socio-cultural norms as well, access is very, very restricted. So we think it really becomes important to address this interconnectedness of the digital gender divide and socioeconomic inequalities when we're having these conversations, and think about how we can have gender equal rights affirming policies in this space, and really centering the lived experiences of gender with an intersectional lens of class, caste, disability, etc., which also shape these experiences very much. And we think that not only address the access issue and these sort of very rights-driven issues, also discussing the surrounding issues around privacy, surveillance, etc., which really disproportionately affects women and girls, queer and trans persons as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I can move to the last subject matter area, which is advancing digital cooperation. And I would like to invite the Dynamic Coalition on Youth to speak. And I know that Aileen, who was supposed to speak online, has a connectivity issue. So she told me that Juan Pajaro Velasquez, who is actually on site, is going to answer the question about this dynamic coalition. And my question is, we saw from your submission that in this year, 2021, your dynamic coalition carried out a lot of activities on inclusive internet governance and digital cooperation. If you think about the recommendation from youth, what would be your main point about advancing digital cooperation from the youth perspective? And Juan, I hope that you are in the room and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. For now,
Aileen, now I see you.
Yeah, for now, connectivity is good. So, hello, everyone. My name is Aileen Cejas, for the record. I will be speaking on behalf of the Youth Coalition Intergovernance, and I want to thank Tatiana and Jennifer for giving me the floor. The Youth Coalition Intergovernance has contributed to advancing the digital policies debates by facilitating 2 webinars, one on environmental sustainability and climate change, where we concluded at the outcome that we need to have more literacy on the environment, encourage companies to implement corporate social responsibility and eco-friendly policies, etc. And at the webinar on inclusive internet governance, ecosystem and digital cooperation, that in collaboration with the DC on core internet values, some conclusions raised by the attendees were about the importance of keeping the core of decentralized internet and inclusive for all to foster the full development of digital rights, that there are needed incentives to stimulate greater investments at the crossroads of youth, digital rights and governance, and finally that youth is the most active stakeholder in digital engagement, and youth should advocate making sure that policies guarantee human rights. On the other hand, we partner with the Youth IGF Poland for the organization of the Youth Summit, including the coordination of the working groups on the mentioned topics, where we elaborated a list of 10 points of action for each working group, with recommendations for stakeholders on the next action steps. These conclusions addressed several issues. To mention quickly, the working group on inclusive internet governance, ecosystem and digital cooperation expressed that there is a necessity to increase the linkage between the NRIs and the global IGF, and the youth should be considered a recognized stakeholder. Some of the actors that could help us with our recommendations include the Dynamic Coalitions, the IGF Secretariat, and the intergovernmental organizations. The final report will be shared in a couple of weeks, and we invite everyone to follow up on these recommendations at the Youth IGF Poland website and share these with the addressed stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aileen. And I would encourage everybody to read the report. And you did mention the Dynamic Coalition on the core internet values, and we have Olivier Capin-Leblond here online. I hope we do have you, Olivier. And as the last speaker, as usual, we are a bit running out of time in the first half of the session. So you will have a bit of a challenge here, because I'm going to ask you a question about digital sovereignty. So in your submission, you indicated this mismatch between the concepts of digital sovereignty and core internet values in the context of digital cooperation. And it might be a huge challenge to answer my question in 3 minutes, But what is the main effort of your dynamic coalition to bridge this gap, to solve this mismatch and contribute into solving this tension and preserving core internet values? Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. I hope you can hear me, and thanks for giving me the hardest question of it all. Well, okay, the dynamic coalition of core internet values, as you've heard from what other people have mentioned, it deals with the internet's, what some call the internet's invariance, what basis the internet was built on, mostly technical specifications. And some of the technical specifications are extremely important, because when you're dealing with a network of networks that doesn't have any centralized control as such, that is distributed in architecture, that is controlled, I guess, by the end users, and with the network in itself being run independently on each part of the network by its own operators, then you have a real problem when it comes down to digital sovereignty. Why? Because digital sovereignty looks, and this is, I'm looking here at the extreme case of digital sovereignty, as in we need to take control of our network. Well, most countries, or in fact countries, already have control of their own networks. Anything that is physically in their country is something that they have control of. And one, unfortunately, mixes the whole different layers that you have, where you have the actual control of the network itself and control of the information on the network. Unfortunately, digital sovereignty is often used in that pretext. So the way that we see in the Dynamic Coalition on Core Internet Values, the way we see digital sovereignty is that if you continue applying the core internet values, then you can have digital sovereignty over perhaps the contents of things, but you don't have digital sovereignty you don't have digital sovereignty over anything that's outside your own network. It's a complicated field, because I think that many that use the term digital sovereignty don't understand the way that they're using it, and it's kind of a buzzword in some way. What we recommend in the core internet values is that if you assess any law, any legislation, any regulation that you put in place locally, and you assess it looking at the core internet values, then you will be able to bring that balance that is required, so as not to effectively kill the worth of your network, and to end up with a fragmentation of the internet, where you have different networks that don't really work with each other anymore, and an enormous amount of filtering and all sorts of systems that stop you and I and everyone else from being able to use the internet effectively and in a way that is also responsible of the environment and making use of the new technology that's out there. I hope that kind of answers it.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Indeed, and thank you very much for bringing the word fragmentation, because now we are going to move to the second part of the session, where we are going to discuss how to unfragment what has been fragmented, how to join our effort on digital cooperation. What are the role of dynamic coalition in cooperation, so the efforts are not fragmented? And I will hand it back to Jennifer for now, but I also want to know, Jennifer, I will leave this decision up to you if you want the Bangladesh Hub to ask remote question now or somewhere in the middle of the second part. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Tatiana. I think it's a very good idea actually to take the question from the Bangladesh Hub right now, if we can, if that's possible.
Bangladesh Hub, can you speak?
Audio. Hello. Can you guys hear me? Hello.
Your sound is a bit muffled. I think there is a bit of connectivity problem. Can you try to repeat what you just said? Maybe you can come closer to the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Sort of, but yeah. So, Jennifer, can you hear on site?
Hello.
I believe the audio might be a little muffled, so I think maybe at this point we can come back to the Bangladesh Hub when we open the floor to all the DCs and also the audience members. So without further ado, let's go to section 2 of this main session. Now we're going to talk about how the DCs work with the future of digital cooperation and also at the IGF. We really want to thank you, Dynamic Coalitions, for presenting and showcasing all your work. We want to look at how the dynamic coalitions work strengthen the IGF and contribute to digital cooperation. What are the challenges to this? And what is already being done so we can pave the way to the future? On the stage with me, we have our distinguished guests from UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Wyman Kwok, and also from the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, Jason Munyan. And I believe we'll also be hearing from Concertina Casa, who is joining us online. Yes, I see her in the Zoom room as well, and she'll be also speaking from the point of view of the MAG working group on the strategy and the future of the IGF as well. But first, I would like to highlight that the dynamic coalitions, as they do every year, do a paper on taking stock of the work that they have done. And I would like to give the floor to Marcus Kummer, and he is somebody who needs no further introduction in this space. Marcus, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jennifer. I have the privilege of serving as co-facilitator of the Dynamic Coalition Coordination together with Utah and with Adam, who are also in the Zoom room. Over the year, we produced a paper, and this is actually a first, that we looked at the history of dynamic coalitions, documented their considerable achievements, but we also looked at the modus operandi of dynamic coalitions, and maybe more importantly, we looked forward how dynamic coalitions could contribute to IGF Plus, digital cooperation, and the Secretary General's proposed common agenda and digital compact. And clearly, dynamic coalitions are keen to contribute, to make an effort to contribute to a more relevant IGF that is outcome-oriented. They don't have all the answers, but the paper documents issue areas that need further exploration, and that will be subject of our discussion in the coming year to see how we can work together better, also with, which has already been mentioned, with the national regional IGFs and also with the best practice forums, and integrate better in the global IGF network. There is a lot of food for thought in the paper, and I would highly recommend to participants who have not yet done so to look at it, to read it. There's a short version and there's a long version. The long version may be a bit daunting as it's 30 pages plus, but the shorter version focuses on the issue areas that need further exploration. So without I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand it back over to you, to Jennifer and Tatiana. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Marcus. And I believe, Marcus or Tatiana, you will be able to drop the link to this very interesting paper in the Zoom room. And I encourage everybody in the room here as well to go on and read through, if not the full paper, which you should, the two-page summary that will give you a very good overview of all the work that the dynamic coalitions have done, actually since, I believe, 2006. And Marcus was very instrumental in all these efforts, as well as other efforts with the national regional initiatives and also, of course, the IGF. I'd like to look at a really first question for our guests. Maybe I will turn to Wyman first. In a few words, in your perspective, how can the dynamic coalitions strengthen digital cooperation? And what do you think their role can be here?
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Greetings to everyone here, especially Tatiana and also Marcus. I'm very honored to be here and to listen to be inspired by all the good work done by the various dynamic coalitions. I'm actually learning a lot myself, even though I do know about the work of dynamic coalitions, but I'm very much surprised by how much advancement that you have made to the various track. So to answer to the question in brief, I would like to borrow the words in the UN Secretary General report on our common agenda, the specific paragraph that they call upon the IGF to adapt, innovate, and reform. And I always remember that by the acronym AIR, A-I-R. So in terms of adapting, which I think you have already done a lot, but could be further to see how they can be adapted to the current issues. I like the approach today in the program, how is the various work of 20+ dynamic coalition being grouped around the 3 issues area. I believe that right now I heard that a lot of the dynamic coalitions in terms of addressing the current crisis, especially the health crisis, but not to lose sight that there are other global crises that we are all facing, be it the food crisis, water crisis, security crisis. It may sound negative, so on the positive side is also not to lose track of all the SDGs. We are gaining good momentum, the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, we also are aware that we will not be on track to achieve many of the SDG targets. So it's really to think how to, again, you are doing that, a number of dynamic coalitions, from the UN perspective, coming from UN DESA, we would very much to see the alignment of how to look at that the work of the dynamic coalitions can align to the SDG. In terms of innovate, I would just say very quickly is to better connect the dots to other work. Again, I heard about how you are collaborating among the different dynamic coalitions with the NRI, but perhaps also with other intergovernmental bodies. I see my colleagues from UNESCO and others here. On the part of UN DESA, I would very much say that we would have to do our part in terms of connecting to the not just the UN agencies, but also the intergovernmental bodies. Like from DESA, we do support other intergovernmental work, for example, Commission on Social Development, the Population Commission, and there are a lot of relevant work, overlapping work that I do believe that your work will be very much valued by them. Last but not least, in terms of reform, the reform is, I appreciate what Marcus mentioned about looking always to look at, to take stock what can be done. I still believe that there is more work could be done to increase the visibility of your work, putting it together. Like I know that you collect new data, you have new findings, but maybe together with IGF Secretariat DESA, we can think of a better way to have a more visible platform to showcase your work. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Wyman. And I'd like to turn over to my right here to Jason. I know there is a different kind of a bird's eye view and also a lot of I guess, consultation with the community in different sectors as well as stakeholders that the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology does. What is your perspective on this, and how do you think the dynamic coalitions can add to this and strengthen this?
Sure, thank you. And just I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, thanking the host country and the host city. For me personally, it's great to be here. My great-grandmother actually came from this region, from Silesia, to the United States a long time ago, so it's personal for me to be able to come here. And also thanks to all of you that joined, whether it's early in the morning in Brazil or elsewhere, thanks to those of you that attended online, and we see you. Just so you know, in the room we do see you in Zoom, so it's great to be able to see you. And thanks obviously to those of you that have come in person. But especially thanks to all of you that have contributed to the dynamic coalitions. I know that's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of thought that has gone into that. I know you all do that on a voluntary basis on top of everything else that you do. So just wanted to make sure that you heard the sincere appreciation for all of your efforts and what you're doing in the work in the dynamic coalitions. So it really is appreciated. So to Jennifer's question, we see that digital issues have really risen in the agendas of member states and in importance. We saw, as you know, last year was the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and in the commemoration we had a global consultation. We had a number of dialogues, and we had consultations arranged by Mission Publique, citizens dialogues, and it was very clear that there is interest in the international community for cooperation on digital matters. Indeed, in the global declaration on the commemoration of the 75th anniversary, there is also a paragraph on digital cooperation. And so we also saw in the General Assembly, in the high-level week and in the opening of the General Assembly, a number of member states, over 30 member states by our count, discussed various digital matters such as trust and security online or disinformation, these different issues, protecting human rights online. And so these all relate to the work that you are doing in the dynamic coalitions. And so there's a lot of hard work that you have done, a lot of expertise that you have, and the question is how can we make sure that it reaches the right people, that it reaches those that will be developing policies, that it will reach member states that are grappling with these issues, that it will reach startups that are looking at how to apply technologies and how can they do this in a responsible manner. And so we need to find a way to make the work of the dynamic coalitions accessible, and a way for us to be able to bring it up in these discussions and for people to be able to quickly get up to speed on the rich discussions that you've been having in these coalitions. And so one way that I see is by having a mechanism of having regular updates to our office. We're a very small team, as you know, and we do have a number of recommendation groups that are related to the work of these dynamic coalitions. So perhaps regular communication just to keep us up to speed on what has been going on in your coalitions so we can be aware and we can bring them up with different UN agencies within the UN system and also with external parties, with different stakeholders in the community. And then as the Secretary General looks to us for input or as we have meetings, then we can be able to bring up the work and the input of the dynamic coalitions in these settings. So I think having this channel or the regular updates to our office would be very helpful. And then, as you may know, within our office, we have leads on various issues of the work streams related to the Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. For example, I lead our work on digital human rights. I have other colleagues that focus on connectivity and inclusion. And so these updates can help us be aware and to plug them into this work. I think another, like Wai Min mentioned, was the visibility of the work that you're doing, especially if there's anything, there's a lot of activities, there may be different meeting reports, but there's a way to kind of present in a thematic matter that is easily digestible, so that in like 1 page or 2 pages, we can very quickly see what has been discussed. We understand there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of disagreement, and it's great for us to be able to see that. But if there's some kind of a way for us to very quickly be able to share this with people as these issues come up. And then obviously, as was also mentioned, we're looking to the Global Digital Compact. So there will be the Global Summit in the future, and then leading to the Global Digital Compact. And we're approaching the Global Digital Compact from a blank slate, but we expect, as you see in our common agenda, it to cover a number of areas that are related to the dynamic coalitions, connecting all people first and foremost, avoiding internet fragmentation, protecting data, applying human rights online, and so on. And so we would look to the dynamic coalitions to be able to provide input for the Global Digital Compact, especially the efforts of the youth and the Dynamic Coalition on Youth, that you can be able to share voices from the youth, because we're really going to look at making this a multi-stakeholder global consultation so that we can have the best possible understanding of these issues and reflect them in this compact. So these are some areas that I see, and I obviously am interested in any other further suggestions and inputs that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I think we're all astounded because of so much work that the Office of the Tech Envoy does, that we're not actually aware that it's a very small team. You all seem to be everywhere, and I think that is the beauty of it. And I hope, you're mentioning that the Global Digital Compact is a blank slate right now, but there's so much good work being done and so much rich work being done with the dynamic coalitions that I'm sure they will be more than happy to give you, the insight and the snapshots that would enlighten the rest of the community as well as beyond the internet community. That, of course, this is very important of all the issues and the policies that's discussed. And now I'd like to turn to Titi, who is with us on Zoom. And she is also very instrumental at the MAG working group on strategy. And this is really important to hear from her too. Titi, would you like to give us your thoughts on how the dynamic coalitions can also help strengthen digital cooperation?
Okay, thanks a lot, Jennifer, for giving me the floor and for inviting to this session. It's a great honor for me to be here. So I think it's important to reflect on digital cooperation and on the way the dynamic coalition can contribute to the digital cooperation. This is a subject that has been discussed very much inside the MAG working group on IGF Dynamic strategy, and especially the working group has produced also several documents on this. And we actually consider the dynamic coalition very important, giving a great, they could give a great value to the digital cooperation because they are a network, a big network, and also because they are focusing and discussing with continuity on some issues. So between IGF and another one. So in the discussion, one of the most important results was that we could consider the dynamic coalition, just referring to the IGF Plus model, as a policy incubator and also as an accelerator because it's a network. So these are two important points that should be considered. Maybe one element that should be improved and considered is the visibility, because the dynamic coalition should try to share more the results, increasing their visibility, and try to share and link the results with as much international community as possible, and also using the NRI's network to share the results, because they are excellent. A point that I think also could be considered is the output. Maybe some reflection should be made inside the dynamic coalition on how to have more impactful output. Guideline reports are excellent, but maybe some reflection should be also starting on how to have more impact. Maybe one could be try to link the results to the regional agenda, and also to the working group as Jason, the UN as activating on the roadmap that will activate also on our common agenda report. So just to conclude, I think they are very important potential, as they are embracing also a lot of subject areas. They could be really a great value to the digital cooperation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Titi. Thank you for highlighting such important work that really needs to be, the spotlight really needs to be shone on it. I see a lot of our Dynamic Coalition colleagues in the room. I know you have been listening very carefully, and also we would like to invite you to contribute to our next question as well. And I'd like to pass this over back to my co-moderator, Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And indeed, with this question, I would like to invite speakers to contribute, but I also want the Dynamic Coalition to chime in here. My question, and I think that I could already spot some of the answers to this question from the speaker's intervention, especially from you, Jason. So my question was, if you want to think about one challenge for Dynamic Coalition in their role for the future of the IGF, for the future of digital cooperation, but one, the most important, for you, what would this be? And I believe that I probably will start with Jason, because I did hear him talking about something that looked like a challenge to me. And then we can go forth and back between the speakers and the Dynamic Coalition. So anybody in the room from the Dynamic Coalition, if you want to talk, please raise your hand. Main challenge. Mark, I see your hand, but first, Jason, over to you.
Sure, I would say the main challenge that I see right now is just helping us access in a concise manner the inputs that you have. For example, within the UN system, I coordinate an interagency working group on freedom of expression on social media, and so we've developed some key messages, and we went from a number of pages. But when the spokesperson for the United Nations is asked at a daily press briefing a question on freedom of expression in social media, we can't really go into all the discussions that take place and all the efforts and activities. We really need to be able to have in a few lines the talking points. And so it'd be very helpful as a way to, in a concise manner, summarize the main thinking or the issues that are being addressed by a dynamic coalition, so you can very quickly reference it. I liked the reference in one of the presentations by the dynamic coalitions on how there's a glossary that's going to be announced. I'm very interested in seeing that because I can very quickly be able to access what are the key topics, and so as we prepare talking points or as we respond, we can know what they are. So I know this was a bit long-winded, but I would just say maybe the challenge is being to very quickly distill and understand in a digestible manner what are the key issues. I think one example is when senior officials in member states, they often have preparations of very concise briefings on security matters. And I think it'd be helpful if the dynamic coalitions have very brief, consolidated summaries that can quickly be referenced so we can get up to speed on what's going on.
Thank you very much, Jason. And Mark, before I pass over to you, I just want to acknowledge that we received the Bangladesh remote hub question in writing on the chat, and I will read it at some point because I believe that this question is more toward the end of the session because it's broad and overarching question. And now, Mark, over to you, Mark Carville.
Yes, thank you very much, Tatiana, and greetings to everybody, whatever time zone you're in. It's great to join you today. By way of introduction, I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for a relatively new dynamic coalition, the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Standards, Security and Safety. And we started about a year ago. We launched at the last IGF. I put some information in the chat, as has my colleague, Vartanatris, who's the coordinator and very much the leading expert for the coalition. And just to focus on challenge, I mean, we've got going in our coalition, and we're very output orientated. And I actually, what my initial thought about a challenge was partially addressed by Jason, because it's important for us to get our outputs out. And as I mentioned in the text I put in the chat, we are aiming to produce policy recommendations that should grab the ear of governments and also decision takers in the private sector. So we need channels of communication out from the IGF. And it's great to know that the Office for the Envoy on Technology, Jason's department in the Secretary General's office, are going to champion the outcomes from dynamic coalitions. Because we are a year-round activity. I mean, the IGF is an annual event, and I know the Secretary General is looking for the IGF Plus to move towards a more year-round activity. And that's what we are. And we need channels of communication. My main challenge now to articulate is support. We need to do research, and we've been talking to a lot of people to help us out in providing us with some financial base to do the research. And that's what we're coming up against as a real, almost a barrier really to making progress, because we do envisage needing to establish a research platform that's going to cost money. We may need to pay consultants to help us out and so on. So how do we get the kind of financial support that's going to help all the volunteer experts who are joining us to do the work, and that we then expedite that work in a very effective and professional, academically sound manner that's going to produce credible results that the policymakers I mentioned and the decision takers are going to respect. So that's our big challenge. And we could talk more about this in our session tomorrow. As also underlined in the chat, we do have our main session tomorrow afternoon, and we also have a networking session on Friday, when we really want to hear from stakeholders about how to engage and how to help us with these challenges, because we know there's a lot of sympathy with our mission to make the internet more secure and safer for individual users, for corporate users, for micro businesses, for innovators, and so on. And this is really the heart of Sustainable Development Goal 9, about creating resilient infrastructure that's going to increase access to technologies and create an entrepreneurial approach that is key to sustainable development and the 2030 agenda. And that links into, of course, to the roadmap on digital cooperation and the digital compact, as Jason has very clearly described. Sorry for going on at length, but it's a big challenge for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And a few moderatorial things. Olivia, I see that your hand is up. I'm acknowledging it, but not giving you the floor yet, because I believe we have a couple of hands raised in the room. And also, before I will hand it over to Jennifer for the on-site questions, I want to read and acknowledge the question from Bangladesh, because I think that this sort of feeds into the discussion, into the general discussion. The question is not directed to anybody, but something like a food for thought for all of you. And the question is, as all we know, we are passing a critical period. How can we proceed to secure, safe, stable, affordable, and inclusive connectivity in this time of crisis? Have any plan or suggestion from this session? Is there any plan or suggestion from this session? I think that we are sort of getting these fragments of the answer to this question, and please do continue and bear this question in mind. And Jennifer, over to you. Olivier, you will be the next after the on-site interventions.
Thank you, Tatiana. If we could also have the mic over here. I believe we have a colleague from the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Universality Indicators, Xian Hong.
Thank you, Jennifer, for giving me the floor. And congratulations to all my colleagues of Dynamic Coalition. I believe we have more than 20 DC coalitions for having achieving so much. It's actually my first time, not just to be on behalf of UNESCO, but also on behalf of the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Universality Indicators. We have been working for past year. Actually, I should actually thank the support from Henriette and Anya. It's your brilliant idea to initiate that the first DC initiative hosted by an intergovernmental organization like UNESCO. That's exactly a living example of a multi-stakeholder approach. Basically, we have been already applying the Internet Universality Indicators in 33 countries. So all those national governments, ministers, ministries, researchers, private sectors, technical communities, they are all on board to our Dynamic Coalition. Naturally, a part of a coalition, they support the internet should be based on human rights. The internet should be open, accessible by all, and also driven by the multi-stakeholder approach. So I see the power of the Dynamic Coalition as a very tangible outcome of the Internet Governance Forum, which is not limited to talk shop, but it's really formulate the actions. It's synergized, it's connecting dots, it's really making organizations, individuals, different countries to work together to have the action to make changes, which is really what I think the big challenge ahead all of us for UN, like my colleagues from UNDISA, my colleague from Tech Envoy office, that now we are moving ahead to the digital summit to looking at digital compact, common agenda. We need to change, we need to make actions. And to my experience, I think a very big change, one is really financing. Because in my dynamic coalition, we are receiving so many requests from the African countries, from developing countries. They want to do the assessment of indicate, but they are lack of financial support. And on the other hand, they also need the knowledge, capacity, and the training on the methodology, how to measure so complicated policy issues in the national level. That's also another power I see the dynamic coalition to help with the overall support, ranging from finance to knowledge to capacity building. So that's how I perceive the strategic importance of dynamic coalition. Last point, I'm very cautious of time. I want to respond to the question on the challenge, how to improve. I think that look, we have 20 dynamic coalitions. Each dynamic coalition is a different animal. They are tackling different themes, but we are having so many cross-cutting areas. We are having maybe shared members of different coalitions. So I would expect this main session can be really a very open and equal forum to have 20 plus dynamic coalition to share their work. And also to share lessons learned, to share how they manage their dynamic coalition. That's a second challenge I see, that we should also exchange not only on the themes, but also on the management of a dynamic coalition. Because we are lack of a sustainable model, how we manage this coalition member, what the criteria, do we have any template and also modality to follow? I want to hear from other dynamic coalition leaders, how they are making the coalition really dynamic and impactful. And lastly, I'd just like to maybe hear more from the other colleagues really about what you think we can do best to achieve the common digital agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Xianhong. And I think, I guess the DC on universality indicators have also worked quite closely with the NRIs as well. I remember you also presented at the Asia Pacific Regional IGF, the good work that's being done. I think the next person we have is from the Dynamic Coalition on the Sustainability of Journalism and News Media, Courtney Raj.
Thank you so much. Xianhong made some excellent points that I think our dynamic coalition would similarly emphasize in terms of the issue around management and sustainability and resources needed. I think also one of the things about the DC model that's really interesting is it allows communities of practice to get together. And one of the interesting things about our dynamic coalition is we have journalists from all over the world. And their interest in these issues, they can't get involved in the Internet Governance Forum. They're doing the job of journalism. And I think that's one of the things for us to think about as dynamic coalitions and as the IGF. There is a need to ensure that anyone who wants to be part of Internet governance can, but we cannot expect that everyone must be in order to be heard. And I think that's where dynamic coalitions can play a really important role. And I think also for other dynamic coalitions to really think about and be involved in dynamic coalitions that are working on similar issues or overlapping issues. So for example, I'm involved in the Platform Responsibility Coalition. I think this new Trust and Security Coalition, it would be great if you guys can come to our session tomorrow that is about integrity and trust, specifically around the news, but how can we embed that into the algorithms and into the indicators that have to do with content moderation online. So I want to encourage us to think how we build on the coalitions we have to sustain them. We've seen the evolution, for example, the Dynamic Coalition on Gender and how that has evolved from digital rights, the focus on misinformation and gender disinformation this year. So I want to invite people to get more involved and for the IGF to think about how do you make these more sustainable models. We do need more support. We are run by the Global Forum for Media Development. As everyone knows, the news industry has been decimated and really impacted by technology and especially by COVID. But we feel it's so important. The future of Internet governance has so much to do with the future of our information ecosystem. So I want to hear more about what the Secretariat and what the community plans to do to support dynamic coalitions. Thank you.
I see one more hand from the floor. Wout, I'll have to apologize since we already gave some time over to Mark on your DC. So please, the gentleman over here, and maybe let us know which DC you are from.
Okay, no, I am from Nigeria. My name is Babagana. I am the desk officer of the Nigerian Internet Governance Forum in the Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy. My question is about dynamic coalition in Africa and in Nigeria in particular. I would like to know what Dynamic Coalition is doing in joining partnership with this national regional initiative, NRIs. Particularly in Nigeria, we have our own national IGF, we call it Nigerian Internet Governance Forum. So how can we partner with a Dynamic Coalition so that they can help us out in terms of capacity building, enlightenment, and so on? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your question. I think from all the DCs we've heard, that they have already been doing very good collaboration with NRIs, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to work even further with the NRI network, especially with the Nigerian IGF. I think I want to go quickly to Henriette Esterhuizen. We want to hear from our chair of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, and then I'll give it back to my co-moderator. Henriette.
Thanks, Jennifer, and I'm really sorry that I arrived late, but just a very quick contribution. I think that dynamic coalitions are producing incredible work. I think one of my pleasures as a MAG chair has been asked to write prefaces for the annual reports of dynamic coalitions, which means I have to read them, which means I am very impressed. I think what needs to be done is for the IGF Secretariat not just to be able to support the NRIs and support the dynamic coalitions. I think they're doing that increasingly well. I think there needs to be capacity to make links between institutions. The outputs of dynamic coalitions should be profiled, should be made more visible, and should by staff within the IGF Secretariat, they do not have this capacity at the moment, be able to then be connected and channeled to specifically identified in a very targeted way, institutions. And I think that's a capacity the IGF Secretariat does not have yet. It does the work of supporting brilliantly with very little resources, but this is a new layer. I think the strength of the multi-stakeholder process and the depth of the outputs really will only have impact if we can link them to specific decision-making fora across the spectrum, from government to industry to multi-stakeholder to intergovernmental.
Thank you, Henriette, and thank you for shining the spotlight also on the IGF Secretariat. I gave praise over to the Office of the Tech Envoy, but the IGF Secretariat, clearly a very small team that you cannot even imagine how much work and how much coordination that they do to put this whole thing together. I'd like to put the mic back to my co-moderator, Tatiana. I believe there's some hands in the Zoom room.
Yes, and apologies that we are running a bit over time, but I do believe that it is important to give the floor to two people who have been patiently waiting, Olivia and Marianne, and then I will give it back to Jennifer and to Waimin and Titi for closing, for the last remarks about challenges, and then we will be done. Olivia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana. And it's already difficult to speak after Mark Carvel. It's even harder to speak after Henrietta. Totally agree with the point that she was making. And, you know, the point that has been repeated a number of times, the channel for the outputs to be publicized and used is really important. Volunteers don't work for money. They work for a cause, and they want to see that what they've worked for has effect and is actually being used by others. The biggest result that they get is recognition for the work that's been done. So we really have to think about ways to improve this and to involve the other stakeholders, those ones that don't often are not quite used to use different sources of information and so on. And so the point that Henrietta was making in improving this in the UN is really very well received. So one last concern for me is really the volunteer effort and volunteer interest these days. As you will have seen in many of the recent internet governance fora and the national and regional ones as well, there has been a waning number of volunteers because of the COVID, because of the fact we can't see each other face to face and so on. And we really need to think of ways to sustain this and to rekindle that interest from younger members of the community that will be able to come in. And that's something we all have to work on together. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. And speaking of the causes, Mariana, Dynamic Coalition for Internet Rights and Principles, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tatiana. Yes, Marianne Franklin for Internet Rights and Principles Coalition. Very briefly, responses to the challenge from our honourable speaker earlier. What can we do as dynamic coalitions within and together with the IGF? Very briefly, there's an internal answer to this question and an external answer. Within the IGF, I echo the requests and comments from Mark Covell about the need for material support, which has been improving. Just having a DC coordination group is one sign of this. We need more explicit, we need explicit recognition of every dynamic coalition output, no matter how provocative or controversial it may be, in the official record of the IGF, not in a separate siloed tab called dynamic coalitions. Without the dynamic coalitions, there is no Internet Governance Forum constituency in many ways. That's the internal. Finally, external. The Internet Governance Forum is a very special part of the UN project, the UN domain. We need to have all eyes on the Global South, and we need to make inclusivity a real concrete and material reality, and we have come far. And we also need to communicate that this is a complex issue area. Like life, it is complex. This does not mean you cannot take part. So complexity is what we begin with. Multi-level, multi-dimensional ways of working is what we begin with. But the Internet Governance Forum has a very, very low public profile. And I think the UN itself can do a lot, and UN member states can do a lot to improve that. So we can also agree to disagree, because that's when real change happens. So thank you very, very much for a wonderful dynamic coalition. And again, to our Secretariat and pioneering people who got the DCs this space in the meeting, because without it, we would have no voice. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Mariana. And I'm getting reprimanded by the technical team right now, so I would like to almost wrap it up and hand it over to Titi first. Titi, any last remarks?
Okay, I think there are three things that dynamic coalition should focus on. I mean, first of all, is the fund sustainability. The second one is try to improve the links with the NRI, international organizations, and UN agencies. And the last one is working on outcomes to have a more impact all over the world, at the regional, the global level. So impact, and this means works on the outputs, interlinks, improve the links, and also have funds to make their work. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Titi. And Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'm going to give the last words first to Jason.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just very quickly, I appreciate the interventions. There was one comment on how dynamic coalitions need more financing. So it'd be helpful to know how much financing is needed and what the financing would be for, because if we can make it a bit concrete, then maybe we can look at proposals or look at how to mobilize that financing. So I'd be interested to hear more about that. And the other thing is that there's so much rich expertise among the dynamic coalitions. I appreciated hearing about all the journalists that are involved in that other coalition that Courtney mentioned. So I think among this community, there's a lot of resources that we can also tap into. So in addition to the IGF Secretariat and all that they do, we can also look at companies and universities and journalists and others that are involved and see how they can also support the dynamic coalitions. For example, could we organize maybe capacity building or training among dynamic coalitions? For example, how to package the outputs of dynamic coalitions so that they're easily accessible to the public. I imagine some journalists would have some great ideas for how we can better make this information accessible to the broader public. And so maybe we can look at some of these linkages. I know that some of the companies that we've worked with are also eager to share training or expertise. So they may not contribute financing directly, but they might be able to support with some of this knowledge and capacity building among our teams, so we can also explore that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And final words over to Wai Min.
Thanks, Jennifer. I just like to also to chip in to highlight this challenge, and I stand to be corrected. I believe there's a need to better engage the industries, private sector companies, including the big tech companies, in the work and in the conversation of the dynamic coalitions. I think this is one part missing. Jason mentioned about connecting the work of dynamic coalition with the senior officials of the United Nations. We also have a lot of passionate stakeholders, including from like TT, from governments, from civil society, and also academia, technical community. But the missing piece is really the private sector, which is a challenge for IGF itself, I must say. The last I would like to just to mention to that the work of dynamic coalitions to the future in terms of summits, supporting the summits of the future. That's also Jason's office together with DESA and other agencies are supporting to see how, I think already you are doing a lot of work in terms of norms, values, principles, and very soon we would like to put together the work of everybody, including dynamic coalitions, to see how we can contribute to the Global Digital Compact. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Wyman. And to all the dynamic coalitions who presented your work, showcased your work, thank you for your contribution to making your main session such a great, enriching session for all of us here, both in Katowice and also online on Zoom. Thank you for the indulgence of the tech team and the translators and everyone here who's giving us extra time. Please do remember there are dynamic coalitions who are still yet to present their work in detail, so do go to the IGF interactive schedule and take a closer look at the good work they're doing. And thank you everyone for your time and your contributions.